Where does death come into that? So being is forgetting. I mean, the concept of time completely. There's a sense to doing and becoming that has a deadline built in, the urgency built in. Do you think death is fundamental to this, to a meaningful life? Acknowledging or feeling the terror of death, like Ernest Becker, or just acknowledging the uncertainty, the mystery, the melancholy nature of the fact that the ride ends? Is that part of this equation, or it's not necessary?
Okay, look at how it could be related. I've experienced fear of death. I've also experienced times where I thought I was going to die. It felt extremely peaceful and beautiful. And it's funny because if we can be afraid of death because we're afraid of hell or bad reincarnation or the bardo or some kind of idea of the afterlife we have, where we're projecting some kind of sentient suffering. But if we're afraid of just non-experience, I notice that every time I stay up late enough that I'm really tired, I'm longing for deep sleep and non-experience, right? Like I'm actually longing for experience to stop. And it's not morbid. It's not a bummer. And I don't mind falling asleep. And I sometimes when I wake up, want to go back into it. And then when it's done, I'm happy to come out of it. So, when we think about death and having finite time here, and we could talk about if we live for 1,000 years instead of 100 or something like that, it would still be finite time. But the one bummer with the age we die is that I generally find that people mostly start to emotionally mature just shortly before they die. But if I get to live forever, I can just stay focused on what's in it for me forever. And if life continues and consciousness and sentience and people appreciating beauty and adding to it and becoming continues, my life doesn't, but my life can have effects that continue well beyond it, then life with a capital L starts mattering more to me than my life. My life gets to be a part of and in service to. And the whole thing about when old men plant trees, the shade of which they'll never get to be in. I remember the first time I read this poem by Hafez, the Sufi poet, written in like the 13th century or something like that. And he talked about that if you're lonely, to think about him. And he was kind of leaning his spirit into yours across the distance of a millennium and would comfort you with these poems. And he was thinking about people a millennium from now and caring about their experience and what they'd be suffering if they'd be lonely. And could he offer something that could touch them? And it's just fucking beautiful. And so, like, the most beautiful parts of humans have to do with something that transcends what's in it for me. And death forces you to that.
So not only does death create the urgency, urgency of doing it, you're very right. It does have a sense in which it incentivizes the compersion and the compassion.
Mm-hmm. And the widening, you remember Einstein had that quote, something to the effect of, it's an optical delusion of consciousness to believe there are separate things. There's this one thing we call universe and something about us being inside of a prison of perception that can only, see a very narrow little bit of it. But this might be just some weird disposition of mine, but when I think about the future after I'm dead and I think about consciousness, I think about young people falling in love for the first time and their experience, and I think about people being awed by sunsets, and I think about all of it, right? I can't not feel connected to that.
Do you feel some sadness to the very high likelihood that you will be forgotten completely by all of human history? You, Daniel, the name, that which cannot be named.
Systems like to self-perpetuate. Egos do that. The idea that I might do something meaningful that future people appreciate, of course, there's like a certain sweetness to that idea. But I know how many people did things that I wouldn't be here without, and that my life would be less without, whose names I will never know. And I feel a gratitude to them. I feel a closeness. I feel touched by that. And I think to the degree that the future people are conscious enough, there is a lot of traditions had this kind of, are we being good ancestors and respect for the ancestors beyond the names? I think that's a very healthy idea.